Good afternoon. I'm Barbara Cecil, and we are here today for the third taping of History for West Milton. We have another distinguished panel. Some of them have been here before, and they are going to relay a little bit more information for all of us. So I'll turn it over to Phyllis Taylor, who will start, and we'll just begin this third taping. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Phyllis Taylor. I'd like to start out with talking about the beauty salons we had around town. This will interest the ladies, I'm sure. Do you remember when you first got your first perm?
Yes.
How was it? Did you get into this electrical apparatus to curl your hair? And sometimes it burned. And so the stylist would have to come with a little fan and cool your head. The first beauty salon I went to was the Dalby Beauty Shop. It was on Miami Street, and it was started by three sisters, the Smith sisters. The name was Lou Dalby. Lou was one of the sisters. I don't know whether her name was Lucille, Lula, or Louise. The next sister was Dolly, and the third sister was Beatrice. So they combined their names and called it Lou Dalby Beauty Shop. There was also a beauty salon around the corner from Dolly's, and it was Iris Markley's. She did give good Marcel wave. I think that is the name of it, Marcel. Mm-hmm. And she would get this iron and heat it up over a flame. And then she'd go right at your hair with the hot rod there and curl your hair. And it really came out pretty good. It was mostly in waves. Then, did you ever get glasses from Ireland's? That was on the corner of Miami Street and Hamilton. His wife was always a jolly lady, and she was there to help you out. Did you ever buy your furniture at Shades? We did when we first got married. Some of the things I still have. Right now you call them antiques. Did you know the town had a Kroger store? My brother worked in this Kroger store, and on Saturday nights when there was a big crowd in town, everybody would gather at the store about 10 o'clock, and they would call numbers. These tickets were given to you during the week when you shopped. So you take your ticket over to the store and see if your number was selected. It usually was a sack of groceries. Then I think about Bertie Wertz and the penny candy. That was always a lot of fun. You go in, and to your left was a whole row of candy that cost maybe a penny. The most was a nickel, but not many people had a nickel. And so we would stand there and try to select the candy. I remember Guess What's. I believe they always had a little prize in them. And that was nice. And do you remember the candy upstairs in the McKinley building when the grade school kids would go upstairs and buy candy from the seniors? They were in a little closet there selling candy. So I was always anxious to get a penny or two so I could go upstairs and buy candy. And then everybody probably remembered Dr. Lambert, the dentist. Oh, I hated to go there. It was kind of nasty, but we went. And then also the Milton Coal Yard. Do you know where that was located? I believe it was on North Street.
That's right.
And we used to order coal. They'd bring it to our house. We'd open up the basement window, and they had a kind of like a slide or something. They put the coal on that, and it would go into our coal bin. That was kind of an exciting day to get coal. And then the last thing I want to talk about, I think his name was Sam Fouts, the lawyer. Well, Charlie Taylor and I, we went together a long time, and we'd walk uptown, and I think Sam kind of thought we were going to get married pretty soon. Well, it went on and on and on, and finally he said to Charlie, he said, "I'll tell you what, I'll just marry you free of charge if you and Phyllis gets married." Well, we finally did, but not by him.
There we are.
Okay. My name is Evelyn Moore Brown. In fact, I was looking at this name here. I could have used that, couldn't I? I didn't. Anyway, I was raised right side of the schoolhouse. I was born here in West Milton. I've lived here all my life except for about 2 or 3 years when I lived in Lima. And I can remember naturally living side of the schoolhouse, and my mother would always be out there at recess time with a cookie for me. And I'd always be playing on out in the schoolyard all the time with all the kids in the neighborhood. And I can remember my teachers. First grade teacher was Elizabeth Evans. Second grade teacher, Doris Seiler. Third, Glenna Kingery. Fourth, Phoebe Patty. Fifth, Mrs. Sando Hatfield. Sixth, Miss Crington. And the seventh, Reverend Heisey. The eighth, Mr. Winkler. And the high school was a little bit different. I had different teachers at that time. And of course, during that time, there was a man, which I think was only at West Milton about 1 year, and I don't know what he taught, but his name was Mr. Nill. And he roomed and boarded with us right there side of the schoolhouse. And then, of course, you all probably remember Mr. Fred Bushmeyer, who was a basketball coach, who roomed with Ned, my husband's grandmother, that lived right side of your grandparents, I guess it was, wasn't it? Your grandparents? And they were very close, your grandparents and Ned's grandmother. But boy, that Mr. Bushmeyer was quite an individual. I tell you, he would take my husband to different ball games when he had to go, you know, different ball games besides Milton. And of course, he played basketball too. And of course, everybody knows that when they sold the cannon was in World War I, II. I wrote it down here. I didn't. Yeah, that wasn't II, wasn't it? And of course, I should have brought that. I have a picture of myself on the cannon, believe it or not. And of course, my dad was in the shoe business, and I was spent, I'd say, 3/4 of my time downtown. And Saturday night was always a big night for all the people. Everybody would come to West Milton on Saturday night, and you'd walk around 2 or 3 blocks, particularly the girls. They would walk around different blocks, and I think they just walked around to see which boy they thought was the nicest looking, or, you know, you know how that is. Things are a little bit different today than what they were at that time. Do you remember that? Oh, dear. And let's see. Oh, I could talk. I could talk forever if I had to. Anyway, my grandmother then was Eliza Berdner, was her name, and she was at home. She would take care of people at home, and also people that would have a new addition to their family. And I can always remember she went up to Mrs. Radeball. It wasn't Charlie Radeball. They had this daughter, Joanne. She married a,
Joanne Moat.
yes. And she went up,
George Moat.
hmm?
She married George Moat.
Yes, that's right. And I can always remember I would go up there, you know, and visit my grandmother and see the new baby and so on and so forth. So then when it come time for kindergarten, Maribel Dickey had kindergarten, and of course the kids were too young to go down to the school. So she'd send older girls out to pick them up and take them to kindergarten, and then afterwards, well, they'd take them from school back home again, which I can remember I did that to Joanne. I always remember every time I see her, I think about that naturally right away. But anyway, I think I've talked long enough now, so I'll turn it over to your first name.
Norman.
Norman.
I'm Norman Stickel. I was here last month. It's difficult to determine what you remember and what you've heard. Having worked on genealogy most of my adult life, some of my memories I find may have come from someone else. But I want to talk a little bit today about one of my best friends. Now, a lot of people don't consider their great uncles as being their best friends, but I was fortunate enough to have Uncle Harry, who was never great Uncle Harry, just always Uncle Harry. And he lived right across the field from where we built on J Street. Our back lot joined up with his back lot, and it was just a few steps down the alley, and we were at his house. But to maybe bring this into focus a little bit, I'm going to go back a few years to my great-great-grandfather and grandmother, John and Catherine Stickel. Now, they came to Ohio in 1853, and I've heard this from several sources, that one of John's first paying jobs, he bought him a coat, and it either had snaps or buttons on it, and the preacher of his church called him up in front, ripped the buttons off his coat, and he got mad and came to Ohio. So he is buried in Bethel Cemetery with his wife. Bethel Cemetery is down here off Phillipsburg Road. And his youngest daughter, Susanna, who never married. I never saw her name referenced Susanna anyplace. It was always Sue or Susan. Now, they were the parents of John that I know nothing about, other than he was supposedly born in 1823. I don't know if he ever married, had children, or whatever, but he was listed on an old record. The oldest one that I can remember is Peter, and he married a couple different wives over the years. First wife died. He's buried in Knoop Cemetery up on Route 41 outside of Troy. Now, Peter had two sons, Emmanuel and John, and neither one of those sons had any children. Now, Emmanuel is buried down here in Riverside in West Milton. He was an apprentice stonemaker to my great-grandfather Benjamin. When Benjamin died, he left three sons. Uncle Harry, my best friend here, was the oldest. Grandpa Harvey, and the younger brother Esta. Now, I have over here on the table pictures of them in grade school. They've been enhanced and enlarged a little bit there. You can see what I had to work with there in the small 2 by 2 inch photos. Now, Emmanuel married Helen Vore, and this is what's so confusing about doing genealogical work. Nobody uses her same name. Helen was always known as Ella, and with the exception of her tombstone down here, that's the only place that I could ever tie in the Ella and Helen. But I eventually made the connection in an old record. Now, after Peter came Elizabeth, and she married Edward Rule. Now, there again, Rule is R-U-H-L, many times listed R-U-L-E, R-H-U-L-E, and they're buried in Riverside Cemetery. Now, that's an interesting family, and we don't have time to go into all that. Another daughter was Catherine, married Samuel Miller. They're buried in Riverside. They had many children. Jan Schaefer, Don Faulkner are some of the descendants of Catherine. There's another daughter, Hannah, married Levi Payne. Now there again, Payne is spelled P-A-Y-N-E, P-A-I-N-E, and P-A-I-N. When I found their tombstone in Fredericksburg, Pennsylvania, it's spelled P-E-H-N, the old German spelling. I've been in contact recently with a long-lost cousin from that side of the family. Then there was Samuel Stickel. He had 4 boys from his first wife, none of whom ever married. He is also buried in Knoop Cemetery in Troy. Now, Samuel doesn't have a stone, but his brother Peter does. Now, the only reason I know Samuel's buried up there is because his granddaughter, Laura Weatherhead, told me about it. We went up to find Samuel's stone and found Peter's stone instead. They were both blacksmiths for the Knoop family, who were involved with the Knoop Orphanage, Children's Home, whatever you call it in Troy. Prominent family in Troy. Casper was another son, married Amanda, and he's buried in Fredericksburg, Pennsylvania. My great-grandfather Benjamin married Sarah Nischwitz. Now they're buried in Riverside Cemetery here, as is Christian, who married Rachel Pearson. They're all buried over the hill here at Riverside. A daughter, Fianna, married John Sleppy, and they're buried down here. Jacob lived here for a while after the Civil War and eventually moved to Saginaw, Michigan, where he's buried in the veterans section of the cemetery in Saginaw. And as I mentioned, Susanna, the youngest, never married and is buried out at Bethel. Now, out of these 11 or 12 children of John and Catherine, I have identified 55 first cousins. Many of them never lived to adulthood. Out of Grandpa and Uncle Harry and Uncle Esther's family, they lost 5 brothers and sisters in childhood. But Uncle Harry, as I mentioned, lived just across the field, and when we moved up to North J Street, I spent an awful lot of time with him. He taught me to shoot when he had time, when I could finagle him into taking the .22s out. He taught me to split wood. I still have his one-man crosscut saw, some of his other tools. He taught me to break rock, to find out where the weak points were, where the grain ran, so you could get the most benefit out of the rock. That was almost too much like work. I have my great-grandfather Benjamin's 20-pound stone hammer. I can't hardly lift it anymore, but I still have it. Now, Uncle Harry, when great-grandmother Sarah passed away in 1914, she was staying with him, and he married my Aunt Minnie in 1915. Now, when great-grandfather Benjamin died in 1893, the three boys, Harry, Harvey, and Esta, told their grandmother they didn't want a stepfather. They would take care of her. Now, these are kids. Esta was still in grade school. And they did, and she never married. Now, I learned a lot of this about Uncle Harry because he didn't have any children, and that generation of people didn't throw anything away. Unfortunately, the fact they didn't throw anything away is why I have everything I have today, and well, we won't go there. But he served in the National Guard for 1 year in 1905, and I have his certificate of expert marksmanship. Now, here's a man that quit school to take care of his mother. I have no idea what age he was or what year that picture was taken over there. But in 1918, he was a Miami County Health Commissioner during the flu epidemic. He was a town marshal in West Milton here in the late teens and 20s. He served 56 years on the West Milton Fire Department. And I don't know where Billy J stands now, but I think Billy was trying to break his record, and he may be there now, I don't know. But at the time he retired, he had served longer than anyone else on the West Milton Fire Department. Grandpa Harvey served 34 years when he retired. My dad served 26 years when he resigned. Now that leads into another little story here. Of course, I had to be on the fire department too because it was in my blood. But I only worked on the fire department for 11 years because I hurt my back and I didn't want to be a burden to somebody when I couldn't carry my share of the load. But I have here a copy of the yearbook of the Central Western Firemen's Association first annual convention in West Milton, Ohio, June 24th, 1931. And in it, they give a lot of history here. And I would read a little bit here. Here's E.L. Miller Dealers in Hudson and Essex Sales and Service. The Ohio Lightning Rod Company in West Milton. The West Milton Fire Department dedicated the book to A.G. Ida Miller, deceased chief of the West Milton Fire Department. The new Durant was a good car. Sales and Service, Stoltz Auto Company in West Milton. C.H. Hale Furniture. And I thought I had this marked, but bear with me just a second here. Miami Service Station was alive and well. The phone numbers, you'll notice if you look at this book here after a while, phone number was 105, and that was on this home telephone company. Here's the Mast Lightning Rod Company. Here it is in the history of West Milton. Tells where we overlooked the scenic nature of the Stillwater River. First National Bank, member of the Federal Reserve. Tootsie Ann Bread, made in West Milton by the Harris Bakery and Delicatessen. Shows a lot of the pictures here in 1931. Citizen State Bank. H.M. Layer and Sons. Shoes, tailoring, hats, caps, and gents furnishing. The West Milton Christian Church. Looks a little bit different now than it did then. Here's the dam and the power plant. A cataract on Rutledge Creek. The West Milton Brethren Church, which has been transformed into a private home now. Milton Loan and Savings. J.F. Willoughby Auto Painting. Wrecked Cars Rebuilt. Citizens Coal Company. Coal, coke, and sewer. And I just wondered, when my esteemed friend down here spoke about the coal yard, if she remembered who ran the coal yard.
All I had was this Everett.
Donna?
W.D.J. Everett.
Okay, Donna and Friday Caldwell ran it
Yes,
when I remember as
yes.
a young brat around town here, so to speak. We don't like to crow, but just try our poultry and eggs. Kugler and Son Poultry and Eggs. Albert Pemberton, home of good hardware, sporting goods, and poultry supplies. Variety store and magazines, H.L. Wirtz. Toilet articles and patent medicines, cigars and tobacco. D. Stoltz, IGA Grocer. P.O. Vore and Company, plumbing, sheet metal work, and heating. What you get for your money these days, that's what counts. Try Coates' store in West Milton. Now, on the brief history of the West Milton, this is what I'm trying to lead into here, the brief history of the West Milton Department. About the year 1889, several public-spirited citizens of West Milton, realizing the necessity of protection to the lives and property of the village, organized a fire department known as the West Milton Fire Company. In the year 1890, a constitution and bylaws were drafted and approved. The officers and members consisted of 29 persons. Now that number 29 still exists today. That's the limit of number of firemen that you can have here. First chief was T.P. Vore, second chief D.W. Engel, third chief W.S. Smith. Engineers W.S. Manning, J.F. Willoughby. First hose, first nozzle, N.W. Vore, second nozzle, Havilah Foker. Second hose, first nozzle, Frank Townsley. Second nozzle, William Tenney. Latterman P.P. Vore, Frank Philby, Joseph Layer, and E.C. Duncan. Axeman, T.A. Randall and C.E. Vore. Pikeman, O.A. Dye and S.R. Kashner. The barman was H.E. Brown, and the bucketman, J.E. Hamill, W.E. Foker, J.E. Vore, G.F. Ireland, William Craigbaum, John Keck, Henry Hurley, Cyrus Foker, and Emmanuel W. Stickel, Charles Foker, and W.A. Miller. Now that was the organization they had, and it goes on to explain a lot of other things here. But the one thing I'm trying to lead into here, eventually things began to come our way in the form of modern transportation. A bank was robbed in Kentucky, and the robbers were caught near West Milton. I kind of keep that thought. Upon investigation, it was found that their car was a stolen one. The car was a large, powerful one, and it was kept the required time and then sold. From the proceeds of this sale, a Model T Ford one-ton truck was purchased. And then they go on and on about this, which leads to the next part of my story. I've tried to write 2 books. One I labeled Ghosts in the Attic, which the grandchildren might think was too scary, but mine are friendly ghosts. And they're ghosts because I find these things in the attics of deceased relatives. The only problem is I'm out of deceased relatives. But on 2 sheets of rice paper was found this list, dated West Milton, Ohio, June the 18th, 1920. And on it is 1 traveling bag, and I'm going to go through this rather rapidly here, sack of pennies, etc. Sack of pennies, 2 license tags, 1 bottle of Barbie whiskey, 1/3 quart, a letter dated 3/17/20 to Joseph E. Collins, Crittenden, Kentucky. Keep in mind the bank that was robbed was in Crittenden, Kentucky. Certificate, Kentucky Oil and Refining Company. Certificate, Kentucky Oil. More certificates. Shares of L&N Railroad. Another traveling bag had Rand McNally Bank Directory and dated 1916. 1 Smith & Wesson Special U.S. Service number 38 and holster. 1 Colt Automatic 32 caliber rimless and smokeless. 1 bunch of 10 keys, names filed off. 9 sergeant keys and a list of numbers, Yale. Another bunch of keys, another Yale. 1 P&T Corbin and others. 3 flashlights. 1 box Colt's automatic shells. 3 toilet brushes. 1 money order receipt, numbers and all this other good stuff. Auto licenses, Kentucky. Checkbook, Metropolitan Bank in Lima. 1 check used, blank stub. 2 pairs of goggles. 1 New York Central trip, mileage, issued Union Station, Toledo, Ohio. 3 handkerchiefs, 2 collars, tie, shirt, laundry mark. 3 automatic magazines, 1 Ingersoll watch, chain and tag. 2 Yale keys. 2 sledgehammers, bandana, handkerchief, mask. 2 caps, 1 regular gas mask. 1 Buick touring car, model H-49, serial number 579345, motor number 558192, with Ohio license 135780, with a Lion bumper and Stewart V-Ray SPL, whatever that is. Shield cleaner, gear shift, 2 extra rims, 1 extra tire, Goodyear tires all around, Ohio license issued to Toledo Auto Club by the Secretary of State of Ohio. This was the car that was sold to buy our first fire truck. Now, what this doesn't tell you, there is an article in 1920 in the West Milton Record that when word of this, so we didn't have radios back then. West Milton didn't even have a police cruiser. When word of the bank robbery in Covington, Kentucky reached West Milton, that the robbers were on their way north and were last seen in Inglewood or someplace, Von Arnold jumped in his pickup truck and rushed after them and captured them either at Calumet or possibly Horseshoe Bend Road. One of these up here. And this is the list of the inventory that they took. Now, what wasn't mentioned was that Uncle Harry, my best buddy here, was the town marshal. He's the one carrying the gun. He's the one that went with Vaughn. He's the one that talked him into not resisting arrest and submitting to arrest, if you will, and made the capture. He wasn't mentioned any place, but I just always thought that was kind of funny. And on the subject of Von Arnold, Vaughn was a pilot and a photographer. Had his own dark room, developed his own film and everything. I have a copy of one of his aerial shots of West Milton here, which is quite interesting, taken in 1926. When Vaughn died in 1954 in a boating accident in Canada, his wife Dolly, they both went to our church here. In fact, most of the panel here goes to our church. His wife Dolly took all of his films, negatives, prints, and everything and trashed them. And when someone asked her why she did that, she said if Vaughn couldn't enjoy them, nobody else needed to. So there's a case of losing a lot of West Milton history. But there's a lot of things here on the table. Arthur Schumann was a great historian here, former school teacher, was generous enough to allow me to copy some of his books that he was writing. I don't know whether he ever got them published, whether copies of them might be in the library down here or not, but there is a history, a beer's history of Miami County in 1880 that lists a lot of our ancestors in the community. Now, some of the people, you had to pay to get your article in the book. That's how they made their money. And Christian Stickel, who was a farmer here, as I mentioned earlier, was nice enough to write his history up and get it in the book. And a gentleman here, I don't see him here today, but John Stebble lives on one of the houses out on Davis Road that was previously owned by Christian Stickel. Of course, Christian had Newton and Harmon and Ellis and Estella. There were several children, and he was wanting some information on it. Promised me he'd be here today, but he didn't make it. So, John, if you're watching this sometime, give me a call back. I don't know what else to say here because I don't want to get started on another subject other than the fact it's been a nice trip around town here. I've lived here for 73 years. If the good Lord lets me go till October, we'll have been married here for 50 years. And on the subject of marriage, ours was not a big elaborate marriage, attended by Joyce's mother and dad and my mother and dad, and we went to the church and we sat there at the appointed time and the preacher didn't show up. And after we waited 15, 20, half an hour, went over to the parsonage, and he was watching the World Series that had gone into overtime. Said he'd be over just as soon as he could. It was almost over. So money being tight in those days, I paid him with a $1 gold coin, and he gave us his old 12-inch television set that he didn't have room for in his trailer when he loaded up and moved to a new position in Pennsylvania. He was over there all by himself, stayed over long enough to marry Joyce and myself. So with that, I'll turn it over to my esteemed colleague here, who's a good bit older than I am and can remember a lot more.
I don't know, Norm. You remember quite a bit. To amplify on one thing Norm brought out was on the fire department. That's one place I think we all feel that they don't get enough pats on the back. And I sure appreciate the fire department, a volunteer fire department here in West Milton, and especially so when it's about 10 below zero and that fire whistle goes off, and you think that those people are going out and fight that fire for you. I am Dick Markley, lived here in West Milton most all my life, and I can't remember what I said the last time we taped. And I have not seen that tape, so I have no idea what we said, and I didn't want to repeat myself, which I do quite often anyway. So I thought, well, I'll go into a different aspect of what I remember, and that's Troop 60 of the West Milton Boy Scouts of America back when I was a Boy Scout. So I'll talk a little bit about the Boy Scouts at that time. You had to be 12 years old to join the Boy Scouts. The Scouts met in the basement room of the old McKinley School building. When I was not yet 12, the Scoutmaster was Wyburn Skidmore, former pastor of the Methodist Church here in town. I tried to join, only to be told I had to be 12 years old. When I became 12, I did join the Scouts, and now the Scoutmaster was Tom Lair. Now, Tom Lair, if you remember, was the postal worker, the one who carried the mail carrier. He did the entire town of West Milton by himself every day except Sundays, and boy, Tom was in pretty good shape.
Twice a day, most of the time.
Twice a day, most of the time, that's right. I became a first-class scout and later a junior assistant scoutmaster. My handbook I still have from scouting, and it was interesting when I picked this up yesterday and read it that it's the revised edition, first edition of the handbook. This one was printed in 1942, and some of the advertisements in it are interesting in that you could buy a Coke for 5 cents. The drink everybody knows, whoever you are, whatever you do, wherever you may be, when you think of refreshment, you welcome an ice-cold Coca-Cola. For Coca-Cola is pure refreshment, familiar to everybody, 5 cents. Also one on Baby Ruth, food energy for victory. Remember, World War II was going on at this time. And it says, buy war stamps. Talks about the Scout and the Boy Scout and the Baby Ruth candy bar, and it says, tell Mom to make delicious Baby Ruth cookies. Recipe on every wrapper. Did anybody remember having a Baby Ruth cookie? I don't.
I can remember when, during the war, if you were lucky enough to get a candy bar, Mother would slice it down into about quarter-inch strips, and everybody would get a piece or two. You never got a whole candy bar yourself.
The uniforms and equipment, Scout equipment, were sold in Dayton, Ohio at the Metropolitan Store. And if you went into the boys department, you had to pass the scouting department to get there. So every boy got to look at all the scouting equipment as he went into the store. It's kind of a lead-on item they use in stores today. We did a lot. I'm just going to tell you a lot about what we did as a scout at my age at that time. We did a lot of overnight camping in all kinds of weather, and we even did it in snow, so we could say we did. And we made our own meals, kept our own campsite clean. We took a bike hike to the historic site of Fort Ancient, Ohio. A trip those who were on it will never forget, as a huge thunderstorm hit us just as we arrived at the site, going down a very big hill. Bikes were wrecked all over the roadside. You couldn't see, you couldn't stop, you put the brakes on, the bike's tires slid. We could never have been able to pedal those old heavy, balloon-tired, one-speed bikes back to West Milton. Harold Houston, owner of Houston Hardware and Farm Equipment Store, brought his big International Harvester truck to Fort Ancient. He brought a very tired and wet Boy Scout troop home. And sure, we're glad to see that truck. We cut pawpaw trees to make poles for pole vaulting over creeks and fences. A great follow-the-leader game, by the way. Later in high school, I was part of a 3-man pole vaulting team that went a combined 30 foot 6 inches to a first-place finish at the Ohio Wrestling Relays, one of the biggest track events in Ohio at the time. Thanks to our Scout pawpaw tree training, I have this gold medal. Now, they said it was gold, but I kind of doubt that. But it does say Ohio Wrestling Relays, and it's the Class B, where we're A and B schools then, Class B pole vaulting. And I don't know why I show that. It's because it's the pawpaw trees and part of scouting that got me to be a pole vaulter, and besides, I want to brag. Okay. Anyway, I have this gold medal, and the school has a long-forgotten trophy in their trophy case. We made rope, made our own rope. We got these big binder twine rolls, and we would twist this rope. Tom Lair had made us a machine that you kind of cranked, and you made this rope out of it. And then we took the rope we had made and made a bridge over a creek near Horseshoe Bend Road, so that, and it took the entire troop to do this, to do all this rope making, put this rope across the creek, get it all tightened down and so forth, so that then we could each walk across on that rope to the other side. And I thought that was a great project. We made our own backpack racks. To make it easier to carry our packs and equipment, our mess gear, our sleeping bags, the whole thing. With the homemade pack rack, I still have, here's my pack rack. That TV is looking at this thing. You can see the rope part went against your back. You tied everything else on to the rack here on the front. And once you had all that on there, this was a pretty easy way to carry your pack and equipment. Now, Evelyn, her father, Louis Moore, helped me a little bit on this in that he put these buckles on, and he had the crimper that could crimp them on there for me. Besides, I told you the last time I was here that Louis made my sleeping bag, waterproof cover for my sleeping bag, so I could just sleep out and not even have a tent. Just put this sleeping bag down in that bag and lay it on the ground. But you know, as I look at this thing, hey, that's not bad. I did a pretty good job. So much for the back rack, and why I kept it, I'm not sure. Okay, 3 of us, Glenn Lair, he was the son of Tom, our scoutmaster, Gene Houston, who, by the way, was the first Eagle Scout to come out of West Milton, and myself hitchhiked to the YMCA in Dayton, Ohio, 1 night a week for 10 weeks to take YMCA life-saving class in order to earn our swimming and life-saving merit badges. This was during the winter and at night. We'd come out of the Y, it was pitch black night, stick our thumbs up and start back for Milton. Things were much safer in those days. And your parents didn't mind letting you do this. Can you imagine that? We did join in all the area scouting camps, like Dayton's Camp Cricket Hollow. These were always fun as we tried to be the best troop, Troop 60. Troop 60 is still here in Milton, but it's not doing very well. Lester Vore, who had a woods on his farm northwest of town, allowed the scouts to use his woods for a permanent campsite in the summer. We could tell our parents we were going to the camp for the night, and away we would go. Much safer times, yes. I don't know of any trouble, I'm going to say serious trouble. I don't know of any serious trouble that scouts caused. And here we are out by ourselves, unsupervised, in the woods. There's West Milton at our disposal if we wanted to be there, but we weren't. We were pretty good. And you know, I think scouting is just an absolute great program. Each year the scouts would attend a local church on Scout Sunday. One scoutmaster, our scoutmaster, Tom, would from time to time say a curse word. Believe it or not. Maybe more than from time to time, if you knew Tom. However, he would never let a scout use a curse word. One Sunday at the Methodist Church on Scout Sunday, when we were leaving the church after the sermon, I will never forget the comment and the shock of a few older women who were within earshot when our scoutmaster Tom told the minister that he had preached a hell of a sermon. So that kind of sums up the scouting days. I do want to say that when you mentioned Mr. Bushmeyer, Coach Bushmeyer. Later in my life, I was in Fairborn, Ohio, at the school doing some recruiting for the Air Force when I had to see a fellow by the name of Fred Bushmeyer. It turned out to be Fred Bushmeyer, the coach from West Milton, who was then the principal at Fairborn School. And I told him, I said, I'm the little guy that came in the old wooden gym that's no longer here, and you would let me in and throw the ball up underhanded. It's the only way I could get it to the basket. And I said, I had a cousin who played on your ball team, Bruce Walker, who's 6 years older than I am. He says, I remember Bruce and I remember you. So that was Fred Bushmeyer. With that, I'll turn it over to Beverly.
It was interesting. I'm Beverly Helsinger. My maiden name was Swank. I've lived here for all but the first few months of my life. I won't say how long that is. I was interested in the beauty shop. Did you ever go to Harry Hurley's shop?
Oh,
That's where I used to
yes.
get my hair bobbed.
I think it cost 15 cents to get your
I don't
haircut.
remember. I know, probably wasn't very much because no one had much money. Also remember my first perm. I sat under that hot thing. I was 5 years old. I still remember it. And I know my mother brought my lunch. Must have taken a long time because she brought my lunch while I was in there. And I had a Shirley Temple curl when I finished. I think everybody wanted a Shirley Temple curl. Also, your scouts, you said you were all good? You do know why.
No, why?
Everybody knew everybody. You couldn't get by with anything. I mean, if you did that first thing, your parents knew it before you got home. Anyway, I really don't have much to say. I think it's all been said. I remember downtown on Saturday night. I remember the movies. I remember being in school. I remember saving tinfoil during the war. I remember when they sold the cannon for the medal. I also have a picture of my mother sitting on the cannon.
Good for you. Good for you.
But
I used to get on that cannon, Bev, when it was cold out, but the sun was on the cannon, and the cannon would be warm, and you could just lay out on the cannon and warm up.
That's right.
But I do remember, I think I mentioned before, that all 12 grades were in the McKinley building, and I can remember Nadine being in a play. She can never remember it, but I remember it. And there was no kindergarten when I went to school, so the first kindergarten I was aware of, one of my stepsisters went to kindergarten. Anyway, I have nothing more to add, so mine is very quick. I'll answer any questions, but I'll turn it over to Nadine.
My name's Nadine Ford Thompson, and I wanted just to say a few words about the West Milton record. I don't think anyone has talked about that, and that was just a fabulous paper. The people that I remember was Charlie Radebaugh, ran the West Milton record, and I'll never forget him because he had cancer of his nose, and the cancer ate away his nose, and he had to wear a patch across his face to cover that hole where his nose was. And that always intrigued me when I was a kid. Mary Gordon was one of the reporters, and Cecil Hodgen. Cecil Hodgen ran the printer. And anytime I wanted, or any child in school, in grade school, that wanted some paper to have a project or something, they'd always stop at the record, and Mary would go back, and she'd always have different colored paper, cut in strips and so forth, that you could use for your projects. On Monday morning, we had my grandfather had the drugstore in West Milton. On Monday morning, Mary would come in, start around the shops with her pencil and paper. Do you have any news? Do you have any news? That's how much of the news got in the newspaper. Then when Charlie Radebaugh sold to Cecil, Then it was Minnie Shatsley. Little Minnie Shatsley came around each day. The paper had reporters in each town, in Ludlow, Lara, and Potsdam. Sometimes the reporter might not have too much to report on in a certain town, and this one reporter, we counted, her name was in the West Milton record for over a year and a half. Every week, she would take dinner. I took dinner at so-and-so's house, or so-and-so came to my house to take dinner. She always had something in her column, and when there wasn't much news, she was the news. And it was really enjoyable paper. And Mary was a sports addict. She went to all the sports, all the basketball games. Of course, those days we didn't have any football. But she and my mother would hit all the basketball games, and she would write it up in the paper. Time's running out, so I can't say too much more, but I'm just sorry that we don't have a decent paper here, printed here in West Milton, because it was such a joy. And I know there's a man here that could do the job, but he won't do it. Darwin, back there. Darwin Sater. I told him one time he should start a newspaper, and he said, no, no, no. But time's run out, so I'll stop.
Anybody have any questions?
I wanted to tell you one thing. You were talking about the coal yard. Phil Yunt had the coal yard first.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
And Phil Yunt's son was Howard, who was a pharmacist, and he apprenticed under my grandfather. He later went to Northridge, and then he had a son, and his son was now the baseball player who retired, only they pronounced it Yount.
Robin Yount.
What's his, Robin Yount. We knew it as Yount.
Yeah, I have a couple comments. One, Dick, about the Boy Scouts. Remember during World War II, those old tents we used to have, you know, they didn't have ends in them, it's just this. And then they came out with the jungle hammock.
I still have mine.
Yeah, which they used in the jungle, and it was a one-man hammock with mosquito netting sides and a top on it. And you stretched it between two trees.
Or it could be set on the ground.
Yeah.
Right.
But it was the greatest thing in the world, because if it rained, you just dropped the flaps, made a cocoon out of it, you could outlast any storm.
I said I have one, however, my son has it now. He won't give it up.
And another thing, Coggills ran, they were the people that took care of the Dayton Daily News. But their office was over, well, right now, where the elevator, you know, the new building is at the elevator. And I can remember that, well, we used to get all our papers there. There was another house just to the east of it, where the Bears and the Gangers lived.
Yeah,
It's been
apartment.
torn down.
Apartment.
It was right where the drive-through is now.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I can
Red
remember,
building.
you know, every day and
I
Sunday
remember
morning.
Molly well.
Well, you know,
Ganger.
you mentioned the lightning rods factory, the mass lightning rods, and I remember a byproduct of them was when they stamped out the weather vanes that turned up on the roof of the house. There was a byproduct there that they put in a big box and they'd give it to us kids. And we'd take that box down to the Milton Hill, Stoltz's Hill then, and you would toss them to see how far you could throw them. We'd throw those little metal things and they would just fly like something like a frisbee would now, right. And I've often wondered where all that metal went. It must have just
So down
rusted
there,
away.
Those people down
Yeah.
Does anybody remember Dutch Vore?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, he was my grandson.
I know
Right.
it. He
He
used to,
had the barber shop.
I know.
behind John Ireland.
Yeah.
exactly, I
And
went,
it was a low, long building,
Yeah.
and,
I know, I used to go in and get my hair cut there.
yeah, Dutch had the barber shop, and then Kugler, what was her name? The midget, lived right, Dora.
Right
Dora.
next door to it.
Lived next door
Yep.
to it, and then I think Kugler's
Coogler's chicken.
poultry
Yeah,
was
poultry.
on the other end of
Uh-huh.
it.
Right, it was.
Yeah, and you know, you go by there now, and I don't see.
I don't
how
rec-
they
I don't
got all that in there.
recognize.
But they did, they did.
Yeah.
It's parking lot now.
I know.
Well, you know, Evelyn mentions too that she lived next to the McKinley Building. I lived next to the McKinley
I
Building.
know you did.
But
I did
was that
too.
the same
That-
house?
That's the house my dad owned.
The double?
Yes.
Yes, okay, well,
That's where I lived.
we lived in the north
I
end
know
of the
you
double.
did.
Right.
I know you
Well,
did.
and
So
we
the
lived in
schoolyard, the
north end
cannon
of
and all was
You
my
know,
playground.
Exactly, that's the way it was with me.
Now, are you talking about north on Miami Street?
North,
The
yes,
double?
yes.
Double.
Okay.
Evelyn, Jim lived there also.
Okay,
Yeah,
that was,
Sleeper and Gene Crest lived there.
Yeah, they lived there after we did.
Yeah,
Sleeper and Gene.
and then we went after Jimmy Crist, after they built their house, we moved in.
Yeah, Jimmy lived in the south side.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, Don and Gene moved over and we moved in.
I think that was around the time when Dad sold it, because I think that Dad had just sold it when, at the time. when
And
the-
Mr.
when-
Gump owned it.
Yes, he sold it to Mr. Gump. That's exactly right.
and I'm gonna take you back a little farther than that, because great-grandpa Benjamin's sister Catherine married Samuel Miller. Now, out of Grandpa's brothers, he, Casper, and Jacob were all in the Civil War. Catherine married Samuel Miller, who was also in the Civil War. He got hurt, and where you're talking about, the first building there on the other side of the alley, the double, was, after the Civil War, a tavern. And there were rooms upstairs, and he ran the tavern. And I don't remember whether anybody in here can remember Carrie Sinks or not.
Very six.
Okay, well, I'm going too,
Well, Darwin has another use for that building. It had rooms and room numbers upstairs.
It was a
yeah,
hotel.
it was a tavern, it was a
It
hotel.
was a
Like, I think
hotel.
there was number 2 over the door that was my bedroom. And I never knew what that number 2 was.
But you were number one.
It was not number 1.
You're number 2. Hey, Bev, you mentioned your beauty shop, Harry
Yes.
Hurley's place. Do you remember what his job was like?
It was an old streetcar.
Streetcar, yes.
Right.
And he had a wooden parrot perched up there. He warned the kids, you'd better not sit under the parrot.
I don't remember that, but I do remember the barber shop, because that's
Who's the
where I
huge
got my
parrot?
Well,
mom.
yeah, he was a lot cheaper than uptown.
Oh, yeah.
My mother would give me money to go uptown to the Niles Barber Shop to get my hair cut, and I'd take the money and go to Hurley's and get my hair cut. I'd have an extra quarter left over there. And so then I'd get home, and she says, boy, that Niles is doing a bad job when you're here.
Now, he did a good job on my hair.
Me too.
Don't talk about my barber now, because he cut my hair for years.
We were talking about Coca-Cola. Don't you remember Pepsi-Cola? Pepsi-Cola is a drink for you. How's that go?
It's a spot.
It's a
Just
spot.
for you,
It's a
so you
spot.
have a lot, as Phyllis fountain tea. That's
Twice as
all
much
it is,
for a
drink
nickel.
for you.
Well, our Dr. Pepper, 10, 2, and 4, you should drink a Dr. Pepper.
Oh,
If you
yeah.
drink it at 10, you get sick at 2, and you die at 4.
Oh, my gosh.
Flavored like prune juice.
Does anybody remember Don and Dick's new and used merchandise mart
Oh,
I
yeah.
do.
That's
down over
modern.
Oh, that's, yeah.
parking lot now behind the Pearson House,
Oh,
but
It was in Harry Sexar's
it was Harry
building.
Sexar's when Harry moved up to Von Arnold's garage.
Yeah.
But they used to have a 10-cent a nickel Coke machine in there, and everybody that would be in there would put a quarter down, and you buy a nickel Coke, and then everybody looked to see who the farthest distance away was.
Yeah.
Because every town of any size at all,
Yeah.
Piqua included, had a bottling factory.
Yeah.
They used to say sex hour, we don't even get a coffee break.
Right, exactly. Oh, yes, exactly right.
And the little boys used to rush the sex hours every time there was an auto accident to see the blood. Right, and the blood and
Well, you mentioned these soft drinks. Hellman's, who was down at the north end of town, of course, you had places all over, the little mom and pop stores.
Yeah.
But at Hellman's down there, your drink, when you put your nickel in, the bottle slid along a track, and then you'd bring it out the hole that the nickel provided, the place for it to come out. But he got in a drink called Chocola.
Oh, yeah.
And Chocola, you shake that up to get the chocolate all mixed up in it, and oh, that was good.
But it was just a little bottle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember Halloween when they come in my dad's store? I can always remember and buy shoe polish and go out and paint everybody's face they could on Halloween night. Do you remember
And throw
that?
confetti in it.
Yeah. He sold out on shoe polish every Halloween.
It wasn't me, I wasn't even there that night.
Oh, Halloween was shoulder to shoulder. The whole street blocked off
You're
and
not kidding.
just shoulder to shoulder. Yeah.
Anybody have any questions? No? Well, thank you very much again. It's been very enjoyable, and thanks for sharing all your memories, and it's been a good time, so thanks very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.